when people think that they don't have anything to lose on this earth and they're willing to pursue these spiritual and religious lies, and it leads to gross violence, I find that the ultimate tragedy, because they never got to see what this life could actually be and what they could actually become and accomplish and do. And my goal is to push back against these incredibly limiting notions that offload all of your potential and offload all of your purpose into this fake promise, this cake in the sky, this life after death that doesn't exist. And when people outsource their potential to this notion, this false notion, then they completely rob themselves of all of what they could have right here and now. And I want to send a message of hope, and also a message of telling people, don't give up that purpose. Don't give up what you could have. Don't give up on this life. Don't give up on this world. Don't give up on the human race, because there is so much more out there to be had, and we're just grasping the surface, this rich harvest of potential knowledge and experience and accomplishment and meaning, and there's so much joy to be had, but it has to be pursued. And if you're not pursuing this life and you're pursuing another life, you're going to miss it.
Everywhere we turn, we see division. Everywhere we go, we feel alone. How do we live in a time that is so polarizing and isolating? How do we find meaning in a world filled with so much noise? Where is the understanding and empathy? Where is the freedom from our pain? Join me, Russell Eugene Welch III. This is our journey together as we discover that the answers to life's biggest questions and hardest choices are not some deep, mystical secret locked away in some far-off corner of the universe, but the soft, gentle voice in our own hearts. This is our first step, as together we embark on our incredible adventure of empathy, unity, and understanding. These are the stories of human triumph. Your stories, our stories. This is the struggle for meaning.
Welcome back to the Struggle for Meaning podcast. I am your host, Russell Eugene Welch III, and we have a very special guest today. I'm super excited to share him with you. That makes it sound a little weird, but I'm weird and y'all know that. His content is excellent on the internet. He runs a channel called Holy Koolaid. It's mindful, it's thoughtful, it's helped me answer a lot of questions. It's brought me a lot of clarity on some things. He's an insightful individual, and both him and his content have been there for me in the past. Here's my friend, Thomas Westbrook. Thomas, welcome to the Struggle for Meaning podcast.
It's good to be on. Thank you for having me.
What did you first think? You could be completely honest, but if I don't like what you say, I'll just cut it. What did you first think when I asked you to be on the podcast?
What did I first think?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I mean, I've gone on a lot of different shows, and normally I don't know what to think until I actually listen to the show and check it out. But we had talked before in the past, because you were actually one of my patrons, and so we had talked through there. And when you asked me to be on the show, I was, happy to come on and to see what it was that you wanted to talk about. Because you told me a little bit about your story and about your background, and that you were looking for a way and an opportunity to bring people together in a quest for meaning. And I thought that was an important question to explore.
So just so the audience knows a little bit about you, what are some things other than what I already outlined that you'd like the audience to know about you?
Well, I was a missionary kid. I grew up in the former Soviet Union. I was raised in a Muslim country. And my parents, though, were, Christian, evangelical Americans from Missouri and Texas. I was born in California. I've kind of traveled all over the world. My whole life has been a mix of multicultural experiences. And then I went to Texas A&M, graduated with a double major in international studies / political science and Russian language, culture, history, literature. I did a couple study abroads. And over the course of my travels and over the course of my studies, I found myself shifting from extremely religious, conservative to not religious at all. And when I started my channel, it was kind of my way of documenting that process and that journey and, what I was going through in my mind, thinking this through, that, I wanted to lay out this journey in a way that people who are having similar questions and thoughts and doubts and concerns would realize that they're not alone, and that it's actually a very common, not my specific journey is that common, but these thoughts and these questions and these doubts are very common to have. And so I kind of wanted to share the way that I was wrestling with them.
Thank you. What would you describe your personal philosophy as?
Personal philosophy. So much there to unpack.
Moral
much
philosophy,
there to
economic
unpack.
philosophy,
Moral philosophy,
life
economic philosophy.
I'm not sure where to go with this.
Life philosophy. I'm not sure where to go with this.
What springs first to mind and is nearest and dearest to your heart?
What springs first to mind in terms of philosophy? I would say one of the top things that drives me is the belief that the biggest problems and the most suffering that faces humanity can be overcome if we put our minds together. And I see again and again and again some of the biggest struggles of the last few hundred years, whether it's crippling diseases like smallpox, or whether it's massive starvation and famines, whether it's not having enough clean drinking water. All of these issues, you'll see people come along, like you had in the early 1900s, you had Borlaug, who came up with these methods to produce more crops with the same amount of land. And he went and he talked to people who are struggling in extremely poor countries, and he just taught them I don't know if they were methods that he came up with specifically, but he is credited with saving around 1 billion lives. And this was just one guy who just took a scientific understanding of agriculture and was able to increase crop yields in order to feed the world. And you see people that are coming up with processes for water desalination, for clean renewable energy, and bringing the price of energy down. The price of solar panels is coming down. The price of clean energy, so we're not polluting our air and polluting our environment, and all of these problems, whether it's climate change, whether it's not having enough food, whether it's not worrying about things like what happens when this planet is inevitably eventually struck with an asteroid, or is hit with a massive solar flare, or has this huge life-ending volcano. Can we extend the human race out and conquer the stars and settle and colonize and terraform other planets? I think that all of these problems, they seem massive, and on our own as individuals, we cannot overcome them. But if we come together as the human race, and we put our brightest and best minds together, and we work on ourselves, we can overcome a lot. And I find that incredibly heartening and optimistic. And maybe I'm a little bit of an optimist, but I've seen it happen, and I think that it's the rate at which change is happening is exponential, and I've got a lot of data to back that up, and I'm that's what I try to promote. I love technology, and I want people to have a scientific approach rather than just settling back in their chairs and saying, oh, well, the end of the end times are here anyways. It's, the end of the world apocalypse, whether it's Jesus is coming back soon, or whether it's just that, this is just our lot in life. This is just kind of the class structure. We're, all going to die and be a part of the cosmos anyways. Why are we struggling with this physical earth? Whatever reason people have for apathy and for just putting their feet up and kicking back and saying it doesn't matter, there's nothing I can do, or it's this world or this life isn't really meaningful anyways. That type of mindset really gets under my skin, because I want to see how far we can push this human experiment. I want to see how great we can be as a society, as the human race, how far we can push ourselves and succeed. And that's what excites me.
So it seems like you have a really strong passion that drives you for bringing people together and making a difference through science.
Yeah, it is very much grounded in science and the scientific method, because I don't think that there's any other way to discover if something is true that's remotely reliable and that can really be tested. And the scientific method it's not, people say science, they think that it's this body of knowledge or something. It's not. It's a method that improves with time. And it's through refining this method that we can figure out not just how the world works, but how close are we? How accurate are we? How precise are we to having the right answer? So in some areas, we're extremely precise, and we can, land a probe on a comet that's flying through space at, 70,000 miles an hour. And I don't know the exact number of the speed of it, but that doesn't matter. And other times it's, we're on the very cusp of science and learning new things, and we're not quite as precise and not quite as accurate, but we're learning more. And so it is very much a love of science, because science is how we determine those answers, and science is how we figure out if we're even on the right page, if we're even on the right track.
Right. Well, the first guy to measure the circumference of the Earth did it with a stick, and he measured a shadow, and now we can do it with satellites. So.
Yeah.
So how would you say that passion of yours and that drive of yours relates directly to your chosen life path of creating your channel, Holy Koolaid?
I would say that it's in line with it. I wouldn't say that the channel in itself is my end goal, because I feel like with Holy Koolaid, I continuously am brought back to having to talk about and discuss religion and psychics and the paranormal and, weird phenomenon and stuff that are, people think are and attribute to the supernatural. And I am fascinated by those ideas. I'm fascinated by how our minds end up believing in things that don't really have empirical data to back them up. So I am fascinated with psychology and neuroscience and cognitive biases and self-delusions and how we can fool ourselves. But at the same time, I think that those things that I'm dealing with on a day-to-day basis, they're more stumbling blocks to human progress potentially. So when someone says that they're a psychic and they can talk to your dead loved ones and you just have to give them money, and they're conning you out of your life savings with this threat of false hope and pissing on the memories of your dead loved ones, then I don't just see those people as despicable. I see them as holding the entire human race back in a way, because they're spreading this misinformation about how the world works. They're claiming to have abilities that they don't have. They're completely going against the last several hundred years of science. There's nothing to indicate, or no evidence to indicate that there actually is. And a lot of tests have been done to show that there isn't anything to be found here when it comes to some alternative fifth force that, where you're communicating with supernatural powers, where you have telekinetic or psychic abilities. And so when people put forth these ideas that are very counter-scientific or pseudo-scientific, then they're dumbing down the population as a whole. They're allowing people to just be content with these easy answers, these cop-out answers that might give them a little bit of comfort in the way that taking a drug gives you comfort, but it's not necessarily good for you. It's not necessarily good for society. So when I talk about these issues on Holy Koolaid, I'm talking about the things that I think are hindering the progress I would like to see. But the stuff that I would really like to be talking about is oh my God, we had this major breakthrough where we're able to fit more transistors on this processor, and all of a sudden our computing power has, tripled, and we have artificial intelligence that's becoming sentient, and holy crap, what are the implications and ramifications of what we can do with that technology? Like, that's something that excites me, is the technological progress and the major hurdles that we've overcome, whether it's with the space race or with computing or with, the automotive industry and transportation and all these different areas where we're getting better and better and better exponentially. I want to push that forward, but I feel like I keep getting dragged back with the pseudoscience that is hindering progress. The climate change deniers that say, that's all just a hoax, it's a conspiracy theory, and we're not actually affecting climate change. We can't affect climate change, and Jesus is coming back anyways, and we have dominion over the earth, so what does it matter? And I see that kind of thinking, and I'm like, how are we going to really address the problems that are facing, the biggest problems that are facing humanity, if pseudoscience is so prevalent? If people have lost their love of science, if they don't know how to think critically, how to be skeptical, not cynical, not just a Debbie Downer, but how to be skeptical and how to examine something with an open mind while still understanding how they can be fooled and how they can fool themselves. If we can't take that step, then progress itself is going to be slower than it could be.
So you said that isn't your end goal. It seems like you feel like you're bogged down with addressing this. Do you think there's a point in which you'll move past that and start to work on something else? And what would that be if you did?
Not in the immediate future, just because I have a list of videos on my channel that are topic ideas on my channel that I really feel I need to address or that I want to address or talk about. And I'm not just making videos because it's like I'm mad and I have to get it off my chest. I'm making videos as resources so that when someone says, don't use a Ouija board, you're summoning the devil, then someone can post a response video to, I'm working on a video about Ouija boards in the coming future. And someone can post a response video and be like, well, here's a debunk of that. Or when someone says that faith healing can cure cancer, and so we don't really need cancer cures, we should just turn to Jesus and go to these certain pastors, then I can show a response video to faith healing and why faith healing is not reliable and it doesn't work any more than a placebo, and point to prayer studies and things like that. And so once I have all of these resources in place, I would eventually like to go back to college, to go back to school and get more of a science degree, a technical degree. My dream school would be MIT. I don't know how much of a reach that would be. But then on top of that, I would love to work on some tech startups. I've had some ideas that have been kind of percolating in the back of my mind now for going on 5, 6, 7 years. And I'd love to be a part of that movement, that push, that great endeavor to see how far we can reach.
Because you see it as a way to bring us together collectively into a better future.
Yeah, that's a big part of it. Another part is just that I'm a puzzle kind of guy. I love solving puzzles. I love figuring out how to fix problems. I love the do-it-yourself / maker movement, and I like to tinker. And so those things give me joy. They give me joy when I wake up in the morning. I'm like, what's a big problem that I can solve today? What's something that I can fix? And that's kind of why when I make my videos, they've improved in quality, but behind the scenes, there's a lot that's improved in terms of my process and my workflow and how I have things structured and organized and what software I use and stuff to get better and better and more efficient, because I'm always thinking like, what is one new thing that I can learn today? And that I find that incredibly fulfilling. I find that fun and exciting. It's just, what is a challenge that I can set my mind to and potentially overcome? It's empowering to realize that you can overcome challenges and figure out and solve problems and stuff that face you.
So you found what makes you passionate and what gives you a sense of wonder, and you've made the choice to pursue it. How does that make you feel?
Fulfilled. It's, I can always bite off bigger and bigger challenges. And it's almost like a Sisyphusian struggle where you're never going to be done. You're never going to find a time when you're just like, all right, I'm completely finished. I've done everything that there is to do. there's always going to be more that you can do. Now you can reach a point of contentment where you say, I've accomplished my main goals, but then it's like, okay, now what's next? And I think that the joy is in appreciating the struggle and appreciating the journey and the process and finding meaning in that and finding a certain satisfaction in, enjoying that day by day struggle, you can look at it in terms of well, it's never gonna end. What's the point in even bothering? And it's like, well, if it did end completely and you were completely done, well, then what would you do next? Would your life no longer have any purpose or meaning? No, I think that we would find something new and that we'd find something bigger, something more ostentatious and more audacious to try to overcome. And I find that incredibly fun. It's exciting. Can it be frustrating at times? Absolutely. Can you feel overwhelmed at times? Definitely. But then you break it down into bite-sized pieces and you set your mind to it and you chip away at it, and it's exciting.
Now, did you always know that this is what you wanted and what you were passionate about, or did you have to find your way to it?
I think that I've always liked technology, and I've always enjoyed puzzles and putting my mind to things. I was not always an atheist, and I was religious for a long time. And for a while, I saw my goal and my purpose as to spread the gospel and to make God known, to, go out and bring people to Jesus. And it was kind of this, it wasn't my purpose, it was God's purpose. It wasn't my meaning, it was I'm doing something that is meaningful to, the kingdom of heaven and to the church and stuff. And what I think that in religion, a lot of times people rob us of our own personal meaning and our own personal purpose. And they tell us that you can't have meaning and purpose without God and without religion and without some, person who's giving it to you. And I find that incredibly enslaving. Why can't we have the freedom to say what it is that gives us meaning and purpose, to have the, especially here in the West, there's this idea where individualism is so prized and so we value the individual and their, we look at the American dream and it's like, you can make something of yourself. You can come up with this identity here in America, this great experiment of coming out and following the American dream. And yet at the same time, it's so common here in the States for people to say that you can't have meaning without God. You can't have purpose without God. Well, in that case, you don't have meaning. You don't have a purpose. It's God's purpose for you. That's not empowering. That's not, this individual goal. This is this identity that's placed on you. It's almost like a slaveholder that says, you will do this task for me to push my overall empire forward, to expand out my plantations. It's like, that's not meaningful. If you say, as Dan Barker says, asking how can you have meaning without God is like asking, well, without a slave master, whose slave will I be? The point is, you don't have to be anyone's. You yourself are free, and that's empowering. That's something that is, it's not easy. We have to find what it is that gives us that meaning and that purpose. And it's this quest, this struggle for, one day something might seem really important to you. And then the next you're like, you know what? I think that was maybe part of it. Maybe there's something bigger. Maybe there's something else. Maybe I was completely blind to this other thing. And it evolves with time. You're not just fixed with one thing and that's the only thing that you're passionate about. There can be so many different things. And one day one can be more important to you than another. Probably once I have kids, my view of the world is going to shift, and that's okay. And the things that I really value in life are probably going to shift, and that's okay. That's part of the joy of living life and of growing and evolving through the course of our lives. And if it was just this one static purpose that was handed down to me from above, I'm not sure that would, really feel that rewarding, and that when you're taught and it's knocked into you time and time again by pastors and parents, it's taught to you that you can't have meaning without this, then when you lose it, at first you do feel kind of depressed. You do feel kind of down about yourself temporarily. You go through this post-deconversion depression where you're like, oh no, I've lost it. How will I have meaning now? Because they told me that I can't. And then you reach a point where you're like, but screw them. They don't know. Who are they to tell me where I can and can't get my meaning from? They've never stepped outside and experienced this. So they're talking from an experience. They're not talking from a place of they've been there, that they left their faith. Maybe they were not religious before and then they became religious and they found a personal meaning in that. And if they did, then good for them. But for them to say that others can't find meaning elsewhere, I think is incredibly short-sighted. And it's they haven't been in my shoes. So they don't know how rich and meaningful and wonderful my life is. And I do feel I feel like it's incredibly rewarding. Every day I wake up and I have overall a good life, but only because I've built it that way.
So it seems like finding your way away from religion and deciding to determine your own meaning and follow your passion has made you much happier and much more just overall actualized as a person, as yourself.
Yeah, definitely.
What would you say was a catalyst moment, or maybe like the beginning moment that started you on that path from where you were to where you are now?
I think a lot of times I get asked a similar question to this a lot, but people will ask me, what was it that set you off on this journey? What was the moment? And I don't think that it was just one specific aha moment. It was more a series of kind of progressive influences that I'd hear something or someone would say something and it would kind of make me a little bit more open to a particular way of thinking. So for example, when I was in my youth group, I had a fairly liberal youth pastor he wasn't a young earth creationist. He believed in evolution, but at the same time he was a Christian, religious. And he taught me, when you go to college and you start to realize that there is a lot of evidence for evolution, you don't have to lose your faith. You can believe that God used that as the method of creating mankind. That, it wasn't a literal 6 days in Genesis, that the earth isn't 6,000 years old, that the earth is actually a lot older, and it was a theistic evolution. It was God guided. And so that kind of made me a little bit more open to maybe the exact strict literalism that I've been taught, maybe there's a little bit of wiggle room. And then I had a friend who was also a Christian, who was a fellow camp counselor when I was working at a Christian church camp. And he said, truth withstands scrutiny. So we shouldn't be afraid to question the truth. We shouldn't be afraid to examine and explore and test it, because it's going to stay true no matter how much you test it. You'll just get more evidence backing it up. Versus if something's not true, wouldn't you want to know that you're following a lie? Because believing something that's true and something that's not true feels exactly the same if you're not sure. Feeling right feels exactly like being wrong. And so I think that those were a couple things that allowed me to start thinking a little more openly and not necessarily having a mindset of doubt is evil. Don't you dare question any of this. I figured that, if there was a God and it gave us a brain, we shouldn't be afraid to use it. We should utilize the resources that we have. And so I just set out to question and look and explore. And what I found was a lot of evidence against not just the Christian God and the Muslim God and the Jewish God, the kind of Judeo-Christian God I was raised with, but just theism in general didn't really have a whole lot backing it up. And, do I say across the board that there is no God 100%, that there wasn't some deistic first cause or something? I don't know. I don't know that I'll ever be able to prove that beyond a shadow of a doubt. But until I have reason to believe that there is such an entity, then I think that the safe bet is to just have a kind of agnostic, atheistic perspective where I'm going to live life like there isn't one. I'm going to do my best to help other people around me and to be a good person, because that's the kind of world that I want to live in and that I want to build. But I take kind of a little bit more of a humble approach in terms of saying, do I know beyond a shadow of a doubt this positive, absolutely there is no God whatsoever? No, I can't say that. So I'm kind of agnostic in that regard. I think that the gods laid out in most holy books, including the Bible I was raised with, can demonstrably be shown to be nonsensical. And so I do have a more Gnostic approach where I can say, like, I know that God doesn't exist, that God is very clearly man-made and absurd. But yeah, it was there were a number of different steps that kind of got me to that point of reasoning.
So essentially it boiled down to exposure to new ideas and a willingness on your part to internalize and process and ask those questions and accept the conclusions of those questions.
Yeah, and I think also a shattering of the fear of doubting and questioning. Because for a long time, I saw that as faith was a virtue, doubt was not. And now I've completely flipped it the other way around, where I see blindly following something without good, sound reason and evidence for it, which is kind of how I see faith. I see that as incredibly horrible advice to tell someone that, you should follow something without evidence, that you should just believe blindly. And I think that it sets people up for being taken advantage of by cults, by tyrannical dictatorships and governments, by abusive relationships. The second someone says, don't ask questions and don't doubt, and you just have to follow and listen and believe and trust without someone earning that trust, without someone giving evidence for why you should believe something, I find that incredibly dangerous. And I think that doubt is how we inoculate ourselves against bad ideas and against con artists and against cult leaders and stuff. And so I think that shift was big for me in realizing that I shouldn't be afraid to question. I shouldn't be afraid to doubt. I shouldn't be afraid to, turn over the stones and look behind the curtain. And that at the same time, this blind following and stuff it's fairly problematic in almost every circumstance.
So you obviously have a lot of characteristics here that allowed you to work through this process, because a lot of people can encounter information and they don't know what to do with it, or they dismiss it. So where do you think you collected the character traits and the character that allowed you to explore these questions and work through them?
Well, I think that a big part of it was growing up overseas and living abroad for more than half of my life was something that enabled me to be able to see my own culture and my own beliefs and my own religion from a different perspective, where I realized it wasn't the only one, and that there are people just as convinced about other things. And also realizing that, there isn't, my ideas aren't the only ideas. And so when I started looking at my own belief system, I had been exposed to enough other ideas, and I had learned to empathize with people in other situations from all different backgrounds. I had friends growing up that were from every possible different religion or non-religion. I had people from every possible country you can imagine. And you learn to appreciate and identify with various differences and to, like, when you're so embedded in multiculturalism, you start to not be as scared to think outside the box. You lose a little bit of the fear of what's new or what's unknown. And I've noticed a lot of times, especially here in the South, people who are ultra conservative or ultra religious, oftentimes it's coming from a place of fear where they crave security, and where they've many of them have never left the country or never left the county even. And I saw that even in college, where people who went off to college, they'd say, yeah, this is my first time leaving my county, and they only lived an hour away. And I'm thinking, how can you possibly be in your 20s and you've never even left the state? It was mind-blowing to me. But for some people, it was because they couldn't afford it. For other people, it was just because they're like, why would I want to leave? This is the greatest place on earth. And I'm like, how do you know it's the greatest place on earth? Because, you must have been to a lot of other places if you can say that. They're like, well, I'm not going to leave here. This is the greatest place on earth. It's this loop of they're secure and they're comfortable and they're afraid of stepping outside and exploring that which is different. And when you're forced into it at a young age where, at age 3, I'm moving overseas and living in other countries and meeting other people and trying new foods and learning new languages, the fear of the other, the fear of the unknown starts to crumble and it starts to become exciting. And you start to realize that sometimes that which is different can be fearful, but then you try it and it's the most exciting adventure you can possibly imagine. And it broadens the mind and it broadens your perspective and horizons on what else is out there, what else is possible, what else have I missed out on, what have I not experienced yet. And so you become a lot more open-minded to, experience new things and to see the world from a different vantage point, and to see the world through the eyes of another culture. And once you lose that fear and those scales kind of start coming off of your eyes and you start to be a little bit less timid about putting yourself out there and trying things and doing things, then you gather more data, you gather more information naturally, and you also become less fearful when it comes to questioning that which you've been told not to question.
So in this process of acquiring basically in your lifespan an explosion in the length and breadth of the way you see the world and questioning and challenging the beliefs you were taught and finding your own path and answers. Along that process, what were some of the biggest or most important or pivotal questions that you asked yourself that other people can ask themselves that could take them along a similar journey?
Some of the biggest questions that I asked myself, I think one of them that I wrestled with was the notion of eternal damnation, because I saw my friends, and when I say the notion of eternal damnation, I mean this thought that any benevolent, loving God could condemn someone to eternal torment and torture simply for not believing in a particular religion. That was what I was raised with. That was what I believed for the first couple decades of my life. And I think that growing up, knowing people who were wonderful, good, caring, loving, beautiful people who were born into another religion. I had a friend she was Hindu and was one of the kindest people. I had another friend he was from Pakistan and he was Muslim. Really good friend growing up. I had friends who were, Catholic, Protestant, a friend who was Buddhist, who was an atheist. And these were my high school friends. And seeing people who had compassion, who lived life in a good way, and they were just kids, and realizing that my belief was that they, for some reason, deserved to burn in hell for all eternity. The belief that I deserved to burn in hell for all eternity without, believing in Jesus and accepting that human sacrifice. I think that questioning that was a big pivotal moment, because I began to realize that if the Bible claims that God is just and also claims that he's loving, and yet he has an incredibly unloving punishment that's also incredibly unjust, then it's antithetical to the message of Scripture. You can't have a God who has an eternal punishment for a finite crime and call that justice. What I mean by that is you could have someone who committed the most horrible atrocities like Joseph Stalin or Adolf Hitler, and they may have been responsible for the deaths of 10 million people or even if it's 100 million people, then a just punishment for that would be to suffer in exactly the same way 10 million times or 100 million times, to experience all of the pain that you caused someone else. Then it's equal. You experience the same amount of suffering that you inflicted on someone else. If you double it and you say, okay, now they have to experience the death and suffering of others 200 million times, well, then it's not just. And if you take that out to infinity and say that they have to experience it an infinite number of times, then that's infinitely unjust. And so that type of framework of hell, to me, struck me as a fear tactic. It instills you with fear to keep you in the folds of the religion, but it's not in keeping with the notion of a benevolent, loving God, or even a just God. A benevolent God who forgives someone, who says it's okay, like that's loving. But if he just forgives you and it's like, oh, now Hitler's in heaven just because on his deathbed he prayed a prayer of forgiveness, then that's not just. There's no justice there. It's this weird dichotomy between being, a kind of a strict just parent versus, a loving, benevolent one. And it's like either way, whether God is loving and benevolent and yet condemns these good people to hell, that's not loving. And if he has this infinite horrible torture that's completely disproportionate to any of the sins or crimes that we did, then that's not just. And so I think that was a big thing that I wrestled with, was this sense of, eternal damnation as the answer to trying to search for cosmic justice. It comes up incredibly short, And at cosmic justice, that's something that I still wrestle with. It's, there are people who do horrible things who get away with it. And I think that that's incredibly awful and horrific. And it's easy to want to turn to heaven or hell as the answer to these questions, but it's kind of a cop-out. And it's a cop-out because if we want to have a just world, we have to make it ourselves. If we want to have a better world, we have to make it ourselves. And if you just rely on heaven or hell as the ultimate justice, then you inevitably either create an unjust world, or you create a just world anyways, realizing that there's a good chance that there's never going to be some final cosmic justice or karma out there to balance the scales.
So how did asking that question feel in the beginning when you first asked it? And did the process of working through that question change how you felt about it?
When I first started asking the question, I think that initially I kind of just accepted the Christian perspective as, well, that's just how it is. And I had all of the easy Christian answers of, well, but God is loving. That's why he sent his son to die for us. But I didn't really peel back the layers of that. I didn't really sit down and think about how the answer to, people being violent and awful and horrible was a violent, awful, horrible death that was unnecessary, given that if God is able to forgive and he is omnipotent, why does he need human sacrifice? Why can't he just say, I forgive you? If we're able to say, I forgive you, and we're made in the image of God, why can't God do the same? And if he's a loving father. But initially I did just kind of go with the easy cop-out Christian answers. And, sure, there's evil and suffering in the world because of free will. And it's like, okay, but, is there free will in heaven? Is there, there's all these little layers that you start to realize that the question, if you're not just happy with the easy cop-out, but you really start to dig deep into it, they're incredibly unsatisfactory. And initially I was kind of scared I don't know if I was scared to ask these specific questions, but I just never really thought about them. And as I started to think about them more, and as I started to wrestle with them more, I realized that it was going to impact my relationships with friends and family, because I was so surrounded with a Christian bubble where all of my friends were religious. My family was entirely religious. Most of my close family are either pastors, missionaries, missionary kids, very, very kind of biblical literalist, evangelical type crowd. And I knew that even if I was still a Christian, but I said, I don't believe in hell, I don't believe in demons, I don't believe in Satan, that I was going to get pushback. I didn't think I would be disowned for saying that, because I think that, if I'm still a Christian, I still believe in God and Jesus and everything, but I just don't believe in hell, then it's like, well, then we just have a theological difference of opinion, but I'm still not an evil atheist yet. So I did kind of ease into these questions. I didn't go straight from I'm ultra religious to I'm, a atheist overnight. It was a gradual process, and I did have these conversations. I remember having a conversation with my parents where I talked about hell, and I said, I think that the things that people attribute to the demonic are very, very explainable by neuroscience. Things like sleep paralysis, things like hallucinations and drugs and things like that. People think that it's this supernatural thing because they heard a voice, and yet people hear voices all the time. People have schizophrenia, people are sleep deprived, people have auditory hallucinations, people hear noises that kind of sound like a voice, but it's just a noise in the other room. Like, there's so many things that can explain these seemingly supernatural phenomenon. And when I started to have certain experiences and then realized conclusively what, with empirical evidence, what the scientific explanation was for it, and realize that there are people all around the world who don't have that luxury of knowing and actually solving the riddle and solving the mystery of what it actually was, it's very easy to understand how people can start to attribute that to the supernatural. But when I had these conversations with my parents, there was kind of a fear in me that maybe they're onto me, that I have doubts. Maybe they're going to be upset. Maybe they're going to see me differently. And I didn't want to lose that community. I didn't want to lose that social circle. I didn't want to be ostracized and kicked out, because that's kind of a innate fear in all of us, that we've evolved to be social creatures, and we have this desire to fit in and to want to be a part of the community. And when your entire community is religious and all of a sudden you're the salmon swimming upstream and you're going against the flow, then they see it as a threat to their identities. They see it as a threat to their social structure. And people fight back and push back. And if they can't change your mind, then they push you out. And so I did have a fear of losing that, and a fear of potentially having it affect my workplace where everyone was religious, having it affect, my friend circle. And so it was challenging, but I think as I asked the questions, I realized that I cared more about what was true. And I started to find a community outside of my immediate circle. It helped that I live thousands of miles away from my parents. I live, in another city from my siblings. I was able to meet secular friends and get involved in groups that were willing to ask these questions without the blinders and without any hurdles to exploring what was true. And as I surrounded myself with new circles of friends who were good people, who just didn't fit the mold of what was socially acceptable within Christian circles to ask and come to answers that were taboo. When I found myself in those types of circles, I found it easier and easier and easier to set the fear aside and to just have an intellectual pursuit. And I think it's been worth it. And it turns out I haven't completely lost all of my religious friends and family. In fact, I'm still on good terms with them. They disagree with me. They've even told me that they think that I'm going to hell on occasion. But not all of them have. Some of them have said, I don't think that you're going to hell. I don't think that a loving God would do that. And I think that I've started to kind of shatter their worldview just a little bit, and to get them to ask these questions and to come face to face with an inconvenient truth. But it's a journey, and I think it'll take time to see where this ends up. And I don't necessarily know that I even know what the end destination is, or that any of us know what the end destination will be. But I think that it's worth pursuing. And I think that if we cripple ourselves by saying that we shouldn't ask certain questions, not because we don't want to, but because we're afraid of what other people might think or do, then I think that we're shooting ourselves in the foot. There are times when you have to hold your cards close to your heart because you don't want to. You live in a scenario where people may act violently towards you. And if you're young and you're living at home and you're worried your parents might kick you out on the street, you may want to, stay in the closet as an atheist for a while until you have the freedom to come out and to be able to separate yourself and to take care of yourself some places don't have the luxury because there's a death penalty for apostasy in many countries, or there's honor killings and things like that. So you have to be concerned about your own safety, and you have to tread very carefully. But if you're in a place where you can come out and ask these questions, then I think you owe it to yourself to do that. You deserve to be able to freely be an individual and think for yourself, and to have your own thoughts and ideas and beliefs that aren't dictated by others, that aren't expected by others, that aren't thrust on you by others. And once you get to a place where you truly can do that, it is incredibly liberating and freeing, and it is an incredibly exciting pursuit. And I find that, and I keep saying I find meaning in things. I think that it's, the theme of your show, but I do find that as something that is incredibly meaningful.
Do you think confronting this difficult question and confronting your fear in this question equipped you to confront other fears in your life and has benefited you in other ways?
Yeah, well, so with this question, it was kind of the asking about hell and is hell real? And, my fear that I just discussed was with regard to how will people respond if they realize that I don't necessarily believe in everything in their holy book. And I think on top of that, I had the fear of, what if I'm wrong? What if I'm wrong? And what if I'm going to go to hell because I leave this behind? And that was a difficult fear to overcome. But I ultimately, it kind of comes down to the answers to Pascal's Wager. I have an entire video on Pascal's Wager on my channel, and basically for people who are unfamiliar with Pascal's Wager, it's basically a way of looking at their religious faith and saying, what if I'm wrong and hell exists, then I'm going to go to hell. Then you almost have to buy into it from an insurance perspective. And it's this false binary of either there is the Christian heaven and hell, or there isn't the Christian heaven and hell. And so I should believe just in case hell exists, because it's this astronomical loss if I'm wrong. But it doesn't take into account the flip side of that wager. It doesn't take into account the fact that there's a lot that you can lose in life if you just pursue these religious pursuits. You could miss out on a ton. There are entire Christian people who have spent their entire lives. There was a guy in the time shortly after the early church who he spent his entire life up on a column, just sitting on the top of a column so that he could be closer to God. Wasted his life. There's people in cloistered monasteries who are just missing out on massive potential. There's so many things to live and do and experience in life that you're missing out on. And it also doesn't take into account that there are millions of different possible gods out there. There's as many different variations of deities as is limited by the human imagination. So how do you know that you've even picked the right one? Maybe you're following one that is the wrong God and you're pissing off the right God. And if you were just a humble non-believer saying, I don't know, then God would be like, you know what? You were honest and you weren't arrogant and bold in your assertions. You claimed that you didn't know. And so you were trying to just follow what was true. And I respect that. And maybe that's more appealing to a loving, benevolent God who appreciates truth and the quest for truth. And so there's so many different aspects to this question that I think a lot of times people who just look at it as this narrow insurance, they're incredibly uninformed on just the sheer diversity of different religions and gods that they could be wrong about right now. It's like, what if you're wrong about the Hindu gods? What if you're wrong about, Allah? What if you're wrong about the Norse gods or the Greek gods or the Egyptian gods or the Roman gods? What if you die and you get to heaven and it turns out that there's an Aztec god who's pissed off that you followed a false god? And and what if none of it's true and you could have just pursued a good life and tried to help out humanity and pushed humanity forward, and instead you kind of shot your potential and you lived a life going to church and praying and basically talking to yourself in a room, hoping for something, wishing upon a prayer, and you wasted a massive percent of your life that you could have pursued some incredibly fulfilling, rewarding pursuit. And realizing that it's, taking the flip side of Pascal's Wager, and then also studying the history of hell and where the idea of hell came from, and how, the early Jews didn't really believe in hell. And that's where Judaism is kind of where Christianity stemmed from. And you start to see how hell becomes more and more and more of this, horrible, awful torture chamber, like, as time goes on, whether it's, the additions of the New Testament and then of like Dante's Inferno and the way that it's written about and stuff. It's used as this element of fear and control to get people to stay within the fold and spread the religion. But it's very, very clearly man-made. And as soon as you start to realize that and you're able to shed this fear of hell, then all of a sudden it's like, well, if there's no hell, even if there is a God that created everything, some deistic God, some first cause, then it's not going to change how I live my life. I'm still going to be a decent human being trying to make this world freaking amazing and solve all these problems in front of us. And I'm still going to try to help other people and to work together as a collective human race, as a secular humanist. I'm still going to have these things that I'm trying to pursue in the most moral way I can, in the best way I can live my life, regardless of what deity may or may not be true.
You're right. If there isn't a God, then what we lose is everything. People talk about you have an eternity of paradise to gain, but when you want to talk about something that's infinite, infinite is all that there is. And if all that there is this life and we don't have anything else, then you are suffering an infinite loss if you sacrifice it to pursue something else and not pursue what's meaningful and makes you happy, because you've sacrificed everything that you have, everything you'll ever get.
Yeah. You're losing your one and only life in pursuit of a potential reward that may never come or never exist. And so I think that loss is underplayed. And suicide bombers who blow themselves up in a marketplace hoping for a divine reward, they're losing everything. They're losing everything that they could have had. And, sometimes they are, I empathize with people who have been put in that kind of a situation where their life is so, and I know that this is a simplification because there are people who are suicide bombers who have, comfortable, wealthy, cushy lives, but oftentimes they prey on, the extremists and the terrorists will prey on the most vulnerable who already have horrible living conditions, and they don't feel like they have anything to lose here on earth. And so they're dangling a carrot in front of their nose and telling them that if they die, then life is luxury and pleasure, and they're going to be treated as heroes and given this hero's welcome with, all of the eternal rewards that come with it. And I find that incredibly sad, because it's like, these are people who, if their life sucks that much, what can we do as society to make their life a little bit more meaningful, to make them realize that they do have something to lose, make them realize that, that there is something better, but it's here on earth. And they may not have experienced it yet, but like, that's one of the things that drives me, is how can we make the living situations of everyone on earth a little bit more palatable, like decrease the amount of suffering and pain, and, spread the wealth around a little bit, raise people out of poverty, because, this world is a world of abundance. People feared that, we would have, massive famines and overpopulation. It's this Malthusian idea that we're just going to have this terrible world of scarcity. And yet what we found is that technology and scientific progress have allowed us to have more wealth for more people across the board. You look at the data from an eagle eye perspective, and more and more countries are rising out of poverty almost 1 billion people are rising out of poverty right now and are getting access to the internet for the first time and are getting access to information, and their kids are going to school and learning how to read and how to explore big philosophical topics and ideas where before they're just worried with putting bread on the table. And if we can take the entire human race and elevate it to a position of abundance and prosperity, where we have some of the most brilliant minds in some of the most rural, difficult, horrible places on earth, if we can empower them, the next Einstein could be living in, some incredibly horrible shanty right now. And we're missing out collectively on the potential of some of the greatest minds in the human race by not empowering them. And so I see that as a huge loss to humanity when people are in these positions where they're vulnerable, where they think that they have to give up everything, where they have to, because they don't have anything. When people think that they don't have anything to lose on this earth, and they're willing to pursue these spiritual and religious lies, and it leads to gross violence. I find that the ultimate tragedy, because they never got to see what this life could actually be and what they could actually become and accomplish and do. And my goal is to push back against these incredibly limiting notions that offload all of your potential and offload all of your purpose into this fake promise, this cake in the sky, this life after death that doesn't exist. And when people outsource their potential to this notion, this false notion, then they completely rob themselves of all of what they could have right here and now. And I want to send a message of hope, and also a message of telling people, don't give up that purpose. Don't give up what you could have. Don't give up on this life. Don't give up on this world. Don't give up on the human race, because there is so much more out there to be had, and we're just grasping the surface, this rich harvest of potential knowledge and experience and accomplishment and meaning, and there's so much joy to be had, but it has to be pursued. And if you're not pursuing this life and you're pursuing another life, you're going to miss it.
Now, do you feel like you've found that for yourself?
I think that I've been scratching at the surface of that, and I've been getting deeper into that. And I don't think that it's a binary. I don't think that there is 100% satisfaction and attainment. And I don't think that maybe there is a complete maximum end of the spectrum, but I don't think that most of us reach that. I think that I am on that journey and I'm on that process, and I've definitely been peeling back the layers of the onion and finding more satisfaction. And it's through things like realizing that happiness is partially a state of mind, and being mindful in the present moment and appreciating the life that I have, and realizing that there's so much awe to be found just around me. Just like taking like a smartphone and looking at this and being like, this is a supercomputer that I have in my pocket that is exponentially more powerful than the computers that put man on the moon, just a few decades ago. And realizing how far we've come, realizing just the sheer artistic beauty of what's inside of this device. And that's just one thing in front of me. Then you start looking at the people around me and like the complexity of their thoughts and the intricacies of their feelings and who they are and the emotions and the journey that brought them to this moment in time, trying to empathize with them and their struggle, and realizing why they believe the things that they believe, how they got to where they are now. Just having this appreciation of all of the stuff around me. It could be finding joy and beauty in a bite of apple pie, and just realizing the sheer depth of what goes into that process of our taste buds and the mechanisms and mechanics of them sending signals to our brains, and just how ridiculous that process is in order for me to feel this feeling of pleasure and satisfaction, and realizing how we got here, where those molecules came from, forged in the hearts of stars, over billions of years, evolving into what we are now. How much more intense could that pleasure and that feeling of satisfaction eating a bite of apple pie be in 100 years or 1,000 years if we are able to enhance our feelings through virtual reality, through cognitive augmentation with technology, and tapping into our own neuroscience and making it better, making it more like increasing our potential of how much we can learn and how much we can remember and how much we can experience, and the intensity of the emotions and the feelings that we have. Some people use it through different psychedelics and stuff, psychonauts who will experience things on a whole new level through this experimentation with diving into the psychedelic realm. Other people will do it through, meditation and mindfulness and just sitting there completely aware of their surroundings and everything that they're encountering and touching and feeling and experiencing, almost to the point where you're brought to tears, almost having a transcendent out-of-body experience, feeling and noticing everything around you. I think that there are ways that we can tap into and experience the world around us that are not, it's not paranormal, it's not supernatural. We understand the cognitive mechanisms on a level that we're just starting to grasp more and more and more how it works from a kind of mechanic perspective. But we realize that it is physical, but that doesn't have to be limiting. That can be incredibly empowering to realize just the sheer depth and complexity of the emergence of these types of processes through a mechanical underlying chemical cellular core structure. When you start to just study that and learn more about that, your mind is freaking blown on a daily basis at just how complicated and beautiful this world is. And you don't have to just limit it down to these early primitive understandings, our first shot at understanding how the world works. These religious notions of, we were just, magicked into existence by someone said some magic words at some dirt and made man. It's like, no, there's so much more to it, and it's so incredibly beautifully complex. But will I ever be able to understand all of it? Will I ever be able to wrap my head around all of it? Probably not. Will all of humanity's collective intelligence as well as computing power together be able to understand all of it? Maybe. I don't know, but the journey's exciting. And I think that every day I'm unlocking a little bit more. I'm peeling back the layers of the onion, as I said, and discovering a little bit more to be excited about, a little bit more to be in awe at. And I think that it's incredibly just mind-bogglingly beautiful and awesome and huge. And it excites me every day waking up knowing that there's something that I don't know that I could potentially learn today that will make my world just a little bit bigger, that will make my perspective on life just a little bit bigger. So I don't think that I've attained this perfect nirvana or this perfect state of mind or this perfect, ideal pinnacle of meaningful purpose and stuff. Like, I think that I'm tapping into it right now, but I'm just tapping into it. And I'm excited to see maybe 50 years from now where I end up, or if human lifespans extend, if technology is able to extend the human lifespan and fix some of the issues related to aging, maybe 100 years, maybe 200 years, maybe I'll be able to push my brain and my understanding of the world even further. And that excites me.
So the deepening of your understanding of the world around you deepened and enriched your sense of wonder and appreciation for all of it.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's like when I had an economics class one time where they asked, could you by yourself invent a pencil, which seems incredibly simple and not complicated at all. And then they're like, well, first you would
know how they make a pencil.
Yeah, and it's like, well, first, you got to get, this specific type of wood harvested here, and then you got to, get this stuff from the eraser and this metal binding from here, and you'd have to set up this factory to make this, and then you'd have to get the little, get the lead, which comes from this chemical here and this chemical here mixed together here. And you start to realize that this process for this thing that's sold for 25 cents comes from labor of hundreds of people all around the world, all pouring into it to make this one pencil. And you develop an appreciation like you never did before for the most mundane objects around you. So the more that you learn about the world, and not just the physical things that we create like pencils and smartphones, but things that have evolved with time through natural selection, through genetic mutation, through these little changes, through billions of different generations, you start to realize, oh wow, this is incredibly complex. And this is incredibly beautifully evolved for the world that we live in. But there's still, problems that naturally arise here and there. There's still, chaos in the world. There's still things around us that we're struggling with and difficulties that we have to overcome. Natural disasters, disease, illnesses, poverty, famine, things that we do to each other. Our own cognitive defects, whether it's our defective ways of thinking. Humans are inherently irrational. We think that we're incredibly logical. You have to learn logic and reason and critical thinking. You're not born with it. We have all kinds of cognitive biases and self-delusions that are just inherently human, and we have to overcome them in order to be able to see the world in a more accurate way. But when you start to learn more about all of those things and why we think the ways that we do and why we have evolved to think a particular way or have certain cognitive errors of thinking, then you start to realize this bigger kind of bird's eye view appreciation for human neuroscience. And you start to see what are some different potential solutions to overcoming those ways of thinking. How can we push the human race forward and start to overcome a lot of these difficulties and stuff? Well, first we have to understand it. And when you start to understand it, you start to appreciate it. When you start to appreciate it, then you start to find ways to improve it and find ways to realize that maybe one area doesn't need improving. Maybe one area is there for a reason. But you can't solve the biggest hurdles that are facing humanity without first expanding your own understanding of the world and how the world works and how we got here. So I think that my expansion on these topics, like just being so in love with learning about a wide variety of overlapping fields, has given me a newfound appreciation for the world that I live in. And it makes it a lot more exciting when you look at something and you don't just see a bird or a flower. You don't just see a computer or a human. You see what all goes into making that organism function and tick and metabolize and live. And you see all the underlying components and what makes a computer turn on and tick. And you start to, it's no longer just magic. It's no longer just I push button and computer turns on. It's, I built a computer. I know how it works. I know, I don't know at the core level, I cannot build a processor from scratch, but the more that I learn about it, the more I appreciate the people that did it, and the less magical and mystical it seems. And the more I start to gain a newfound appreciation for the intricacies and the complexities of this world and what we can accomplish and what we can do with a little bit more understanding, a scientific understanding of how things operate.
Now, does that understanding change what you feel your personal responsibility and goals are?
I think in a way, my sense of responsibility when it comes to this world took a drastic shift when I stopped being religious, because that was my entire worldview, was my religious worldview beforehand. And my religious worldview said that my purpose and my goal was to go and convert more people into the religion. And so naturally, religions that have that as their underlying tenet are going to spread faster. They're going to grow faster, but it's not necessarily in the people's best interest. It's in the religion's best interest. It's in the best interest of the idea that wants to be spread, for the idea to contain a clause that says, and you are supposed to spread this idea under pain of torture or death or under promise of divine reward. And so that's my purpose beforehand very much was just, I have to propagate this religious belief. I have to spread the kingdom of God. And as soon as I started to kind of question the core tenets and the core structure of that belief set, and it started to crumble, and then I started to look at how the world actually works, then you're damn right I'm going to shift away from pursuing an idea that I know is structurally unsound versus pursuing a better understanding of the world and how we can actually approach the problems in the world from a data-based, empirical, data and proof backed standpoint. And so yeah, it very, very much changed, the way that I pursue my goals and my purpose and stuff in life.
How did the realization that you could define your own sense of meaning and choose your own path in life make you feel?
Initially terrified. Initially it's kind of overwhelming and it's anxiety inducing. And I'm not really an anxious person. I think that's one thing I'm very grateful for growing up overseas, is that I'm not a very anxious person, because I've experienced so many different things that for most people it would be, kind of fearful, and it's outside of what most people are comfortable with. And I've had to stretch my comfort zone. But all of a sudden, shifting away from my entire goal is to spread the kingdom of God to now I have to come up with my own purpose and meaning and destiny. I was like, well, no one taught me how to do that. No, nobody sat down and guided me through, how to come up with my own purpose and meaning. That's not something that they teach in college or high school. That's not something that my parents ever taught me. And so it's, where do you begin? Where do you start looking for, what is it that gives you joy in life? What is it that gives, that you can do to bring joy to others in life? What are some different ways that you can find something that is meaningful to you? Those are difficult questions. And yeah, there's kind of the hedonistic approach that you could take and be like, well, yeah, I really like to eat more food and have more sex and do drugs and alcohol and stuff. It's like, and those things, kind of leave you feeling a little empty. But it's like, but they can be fine within moderation, and they can be fine in the right context, and they can be something that is, can be meaningful if, for example, you can feel really, really close to someone who you love through, sexual intimacy, and you can have an incredible time having a Thanksgiving dinner with family that's incredibly delicious, where you're just really appreciating the moment. It's like those things in and of themselves, food and drink and, sex and pleasure and hedonism and stuff in and of themselves, they may not be the best pursuit, but if it's a way to find interpersonal connection and to bring joy to other people and to find ways to bring humanity together, then I think that those things can be rewarding through that. They can be used to be meaningful, or to bring meaning. And so initially I was scared not scared to go on this pursuit and this journey, but I was worried that I wouldn't know how, or I was worried that I might not be able to. And I thought that, well, the thing that I had been told my whole life brought me meaning, all of a sudden I realize is kind of meaningless. What if the next thing that I pursue turns out to be meaningless? And it's a difficult question. It's a important question. But ultimately, it's like, what if it turns out to be meaningless, but you wouldn't have known if you didn't pursue it? And you wouldn't know that maybe there's something else that does bring you meaning. And you wouldn't know if maybe there's something else that is bigger and more important. And maybe you enjoy the journey and you enjoy the struggle, and you can find some meaning and purpose. And that's ultimately what I kind of settled upon, is that the meaning and the purpose that we're wrestling for and struggling for, that we're having trouble to, all of humanity is having trouble to find this objective sense of purpose. It doesn't have to be this objective top-down sense of purpose. It's something that is it meaningful to you? Is this something that means something to you? Does your family, your friends, your children, are they meaningful to you? Is it their success meaningful to you? watching your kid go off to college and thrive and get a good, successful job and have a happy family and having those things yourself. Like, is that meaningful to you? That's the ultimate question is can you find something that brings meaning to your life, that you can be content with, that you can be satisfied with, that can bring you joy? To me, I have this paradoxical, weird feeling, or not feeling, but my sense of purpose in a way is this never-ending chase where it's not the quest for purpose that gives me purpose. It's the quest for solving the problems that are never-ending and Sisyphusian, and that it's every I don't know if Sisyphusian is the best way to put it, because Sisyphus was the guy in Greek mythology who was forced to roll a boulder up a hill, and then the boulder fell down, and then the next day he had to roll the boulder up the hill again, and it was this never-ending struggle and kind of meaninglessness where he's doing the same thing every single day, and it's just redundant and pointless because he's going to be back to square one. And I don't necessarily see the struggle as like that. There are some things that I do every day, like brush my teeth, and it's like, well, great, but then the next day I'm going to have to do it again. But in terms of overall progress, I think that humanity is pushing itself forward and growing and expanding, and it's not just back to square one, 2 steps forward, 2 steps back. It's like, no, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but we keep going forward a little bit each day. But I do find meaning in the journey, in the struggle, in in wrestling with pushing ourselves forward. And so I in a way, I'll never actually have that, this is the answer. This is the 100% concrete answer where this is where meaning comes from. And it comes from this divine source, and that's it. And you don't need to ask any more questions. It's never done. It's never finished. It's never complete. I wake up today saying, what is something that I can do and accomplish? What is something that I can make the world better? What is a question that I want to have answered that I can pursue knowledge of and learn and discover? And it's this wrestle, it's this ongoing, never-ending climb. But if you enjoy the hike, then you're winning. You're coming out on top. You are enjoying the process, and you're also accomplishing things, and you're gaining something, and you're growing, and you're learning, and you're thriving, because you're not doing it. And if your mindset while you're doing these things is, oh, great, I've got another problem, I've got another thing that I've got to fix, I got another thing that I have to solve. But if your mindset shifts to one of, it is incredible that I get to be alive right now in this day and age, that I get to experience life, that I get to breathe. Look at the things that I have that other people don't have. Look at the things that I'm able to do. There's the Chinese proverb, I used to complain that I had no shoes till I met someone who had no feet. You have a massive perspective shift, realizing the things that you can be grateful for, realizing all of the things that you do take for granted on a day-to-day basis. And if you approach life in a excited way, and you have this perspective of, I get to be alive, I get to learn these new things. Oh my God, I have internet access. So many people don't have that. I get to not take that for granted today and get to use this in a way where I learn something, where I grow, and it's self-development. And maybe my garage door broke. Well, there's a lot of people who don't have garages. I could look at this and complain and be like, God damn it, my life sucks. I've got this thing, it's hot, and it's, in Texas, and, I've got to fix this. Or you can be like, oh my God, I never knew how garages work. Now I get to learn, and I get to learn the mechanisms, and maybe I can upgrade it to a smart garage door opener that I can open from my phone, or, while I'm changing it out. Or, this is a character building exercise where, I can overcome my desire to complain and to be a stick in the mud and just, take out that bitterness that this broke on everyone else around me. Instead, I can use it as a character building opportunity to be like, you know what? It's hot. It's not comfortable. Here's something that broke that I take for granted. But once it starts working, I can learn to appreciate it more. I can learn to have a change of mindset where every time that I push the button and the garage door goes up, I'm now excited and enthralled, and I understand the mechanism of how it works. And I take pride in the fact that I installed it and made, it work the way that it does. And I also appreciate the people who have made that as something that I can experience and use on a daily basis. Like, it's little things like that around us that mindset shift, it has to be conscious. You have to decide that you want to live a life of gratitude and mindfulness and awareness and live in the moment. It's not something that just passively happens to you. But when you make that shift, then your day-to-day life can be a whole lot more fulfilling and rewarding when you have an outlook like that.
So you find meaning in the wonder of learning new things so that you can experience the joy of bringing more value to yourself and creating value that you can share with all of us collectively.
All of life is learning. All of life is using our brain to adapt. And whether that's a kid learning how to walk, whether that's a baseball player learning muscle memory of throwing a catch, whether that is, someone who is a musician learning how to play an instrument, all of life is learning. And we learn skills and talents. We learn how to adapt to the world, whether it's, at the grocery store, learning what fruit is ripe and fresh and tastes delicious. We learn in order to improve our outlook on life and how to improve our position in life. And so if we just become comfortable and kind of shut off our ability to learn, we shut off our ability to grow, we shut off our ability to help others. And I think a lot of times people get comfortable and complacent and they say, you know what? I went to college, I got my degree, I got a job I'm making money from. That's it. I can just stop learning now. And I'm like, but life is learning. Life is, if you shut off your learning all of a sudden, then if you're content with where you are exactly right now and you don't want to really go anywhere else or do anything else, then fine, sit down, turn on the TV, watch some reality TV show. And maybe, I'm not dissing on, what people use to just relax. If they want to go and watch something mindless at the end of the day, that's fine. But if on the grand scale of your life's trajectory, if you reach a point where you are so complacent and content where you're just like, I'm not pursuing anything new, I'm not pushing myself, I'm not learning, I'm not growing, I'm not developing myself and my knowledge and my talents and everything, then I think that you are missing out on a good chunk of life. You're missing out on a bunch of your own personal potential. You're missing out on ways that you could help others, that you could help society, you could help the world. There's things, problems that you could solve and fix and accomplish in your life, and in other people's lives, and with the world around us. And so I find a tremendous amount of purpose in being able to push that potential and to realize and to actualize my own potential by seizing life by the reins and doing it. But I also do find it a little bit kind of sad when I see people who think that they don't have potential. And so they just kind of clock it in and sit back and don't actually see how far they could go. And I'm not talking about people who are just completely content and happy. Like if you found a life where you're happy and you're like, you know what, I'm just ready to retire, or I've got kids and I'm just enjoying spending time with kids and stuff. I still think that you're learning. You're like every day you're learning something new about family and about, children and raising them and about, how to be a good husband or wife. And I think that you're experiencing life, but if you're in the same monotonous routine every single day and you're not growing, maybe you're learning how to be more mindful and present and happy. Maybe you're learning how to be like a happiness ninja in a way and find contentment in the day to day and kind of like to grow inwards rather than outwards. But I still think that it comes through learning and it comes through kind of mental and cognitive growth. And the second that we stop growing, I think we start dying.
So wherever we are and whatever we're doing, no matter how outside of the ordinary or inside of the ordinary it is, we always have the opportunity to learn and grow from what's around us.
Yeah. And I've seen that with people who are completely paralyzed in a wheelchair and seem to be, completely at a inability to do things that we take for granted and all this stuff that I'm talking about. And yet I've seen them, still push themselves, whether it's through a intellectual pursuit, like someone like Stephen Hawking, who is an absolutely brilliant physicist, and he's writing books and stuff, and yet he's completely paralyzed and relying on, a computer to speak, or whether it's someone who sits and contemplates, philosophical topics or concepts or just dives inward and finds ways to be content and happy with what they have and to take what they do have, to not take it for granted. Like, I've seen people like that who I can learn a tremendous amount from, and they just have a rich personal perspective that only they can share because only they have lived. And so I think that all of us have ways that we can grow, and we can have things that we can share and that others can learn from, and we can all learn from each other. I just encourage people to not be stagnant, to never stop growing, never stop learning, never stop pushing yourselves in the areas that you can.
What would you say to someone who is either not open to that or apprehensive to it?
What do you have to fear? And honestly, I've seen time and time again when old people on their deathbeds are asked, what is your number one regret? They never regret, oh my God, I wish that I hadn't. Sometimes they do, but normally it's not, I wish that I hadn't done such and such. It's usually, I wish that I had done this one thing or had done this other thing. I wish that I had the courage to go out and try this thing or to do this new thing, or it's usually things on people's bucket lists that they regret not doing. And it's usually the reasons that they don't do those things is because of fear. It's because they're afraid to step out and to try it and to do it. And it's like, are you gonna, what's more terrifying at the end of the day, trying and failing or regretting that you never tried at all? I would rather try and fail and keep trying and failing as many times as I need until I find something that I really thrive at and that I'm accomplished and I feel good about and that I change the world in a positive way. So, the fear of regret, I think, is the worst fear of all.
Right. You're right, because our time is so precious, and especially really because it is limited. And so that makes the value of every moment and every breath we take so astronomically precious and beautiful, and it's so easy to get lost in the moment. But if you think about it, every time you just breathe in and take oxygen, you only get that breath once. You only get that moment once. And to just take the moment to pause and just fully feel and appreciate. Just breathing in, just that fundamental baseline of the fact that you're alive and you have senses and experiences, and the wealth of value and diversity that you can experience and share because of that. It's mind-boggling, and it's empowering.
I think it was Steve Jobs that said that if you live every single moment and every single day like it's going to be your last, one of these days, sooner or later, you'll be right. And it's easy to take every new day for granted, and it's easy to lose the perspective that this life isn't eternal. This is finite. And so we, whether we're here for 70 years or 2, it's or 70 more years or 2 more years, the more that we can seize the day and, live a good life, a fulfilling life, and appreciate and be in the moment every day, the more we're going to get out of life and the more we're going to pack life into the years that we have.
If you could say one thing to yourself at any point in time, past, present, or future, what would you say? Anything to yourself, past, present, or future. When would it be, and what would you say?
Oh, on topic with the podcast, or if I could say anything to
yourself, past, present, or future. When would it be, and what would you say?
I'd probably tell myself in high school to study engineering. But I don't know. I think I would tell myself to not worry so much about what other people think about me. To not worry so much about the opinions of people, of my peers, of my family, of my friends. Because the circle of people that you surround yourself with will change over time. And if someone doesn't like who you are, and someone doesn't like you, what you are pursuing, they may not be a good fit for someone in your life to begin with. And ultimately, at the end of the day, who are you trying to please and impress and satisfy? Or do you want to, at the end of your life, look back and say, well, you know, I didn't do anything that I wanted to accomplish. I wasn't myself, and I lived a very conformist life, but at least I made, you know, this person happy. At least this person didn't think I was a loser. At least that person thought that I was, you know, successful. No, at the end of the day, you got to look yourself in the mirror. And when you look yourself in the mirror, are you happy with the direction that you're taking? Do you feel like you're going to be satisfied with the things that you've accomplished? And if not, why are you living that way? It's not who you are. You got to be true to yourself. And if you're not afraid of what other people think, then you can really start to pursue the things that matter the most to you.
Now, what do you want your legacy to be? What value do you want to leave behind?
I want people to realize that they can make a dent in the universe, that they can make a difference, that we can work together and solve the biggest problems that face mankind. But it's not going to happen if we don't work on it together. So when I pass away, if people are reading my tombstone or at my funeral and, you know, giving a eulogy, I want them to say that I got people to think and I got people to act, that I got people to realize what problems are facing humanity and to realize how the world actually works, and how we can discover how the world actually works. Because I don't know all the information, but I think that I know enough about how people think and how people figure stuff out that I can get people to start thinking in a way that is more productive. And if my eulogy says that I got people to think, and I got people to think more critically and more skeptically and more honestly, and then got them to act on it and push humanity in the right direction, then I think I will have accomplished my goals.
And how would that make you feel?
I'll be dead. I don't think I'll care.
Fair enough.
But I mean, right now, I think I'll feel fulfilled if before I die, if let's say that I've got terminal cancer and it's a year before I die and I have some speech honoring me or something, and people say that, or, you know, and I'm able to witness and experience what people will say about me before I'm passed, then I think I'll feel accomplished. I think that I'll feel like I have passed the baton in a way that has left the world better off than when I started, that it's set my kids and grandkids up for success, that it's helped the people around me, that I've touched people's lives in a way that is remarkable and that is impactful and deep and meaningful and beautiful, and that I've made humanity a little bit better off. And I kind of want to see how far we can get as a human race. I kind of want to travel to space. I kind of want to see us colonize Mars. I kind of want to see the rise of, smarter computers and technology and stuff, and see us overcome disease. And I would love to live to be around to see all that stuff happen. I don't know if I will. I don't know how long I'm going to live. Nobody does. But if I'm able to push humanity a little bit further in that direction, and I see those dreams starting to come to fruition, and I see the joy in humanity solving and overcoming this stuff and just coming together as the human race in a way that I don't know has happened since the moon landing. If I see more of that, then it will definitely instill a little bit of hope in me for the future of humanity. And I want to go out excited on my deathbed. I don't want to go out, depressed and disturbed at how horrible the state of affairs are. I want to see all of the progress that we've made and see where humanity's going and the trajectory of it all, and be like, I helped push that forward. I feel somewhat responsible for it, even if I was just a small ripple. And I think that will be rewarding in itself.
You have made a difference, because you've made a difference in my life. You made a big difference in my life. And I know for a fact that you've made a difference in other people's lives, because I've shared a lot of the content that you've created with other people, and I've seen a change in their lives as well. So I think you've created a lot of value, and I think you have a lot more value to create. And I'm a little prejudiced because this is my podcast and I think my content is awesome, but I am super excited for this episode to come out because I think it turned out absolutely amazing.
Thank you. Well, you asked some hard questions, and I think it took me a little while to put my thoughts together, because they were difficult questions. And I think that they're questions that have been asked for hundreds of years by philosophers far greater than either of us. And trying to
speak for yourself, I'm the best ever.
Trying to figure out, conclusive answers to these questions is hard, right, if not potentially impossible to get, perfect answer. I think it can even vary from person to person, from culture to culture. But I think we're on the right track. And I could be wrong about that. And I'm open to being wrong and to coming back 10 years from now and re-evaluating, my perspective and my position. I think that we all should have a certain level of humility in that regard. But I think that they were good questions, and I think that the episode turned out great so far.
Thank you. Is there anything that you wanted to say that you either forgot along the way or didn't get a chance to say?
I don't think that there was necessarily anything that we missed. If I had to go out on a particular note, it would just be encouraging the audience to, I say literally at the end of every single episode of Holy Koolaid, I tell people to dare to be curious. And that's what I want people to do, to not be afraid of trying new things, learning new things, experiencing new things, and asking difficult questions, and not just being content with dogma, not being content with being told not to doubt or not to explore and learn about the world, because there's so much out there, and there's so much beauty in this world, and there's pain and there's suffering, there's awful things too, but there's so much that is exciting and invigorating and hopeful, and you're only going to discover it by going out and learning and building up your experiences. So go out and dare to be curious.
Right. You don't have to be afraid. And if you are, it's okay, because fear is human, and that's normal.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. This was an amazing episode. Knocked my socks off. There's a couple parts where I don't know if you could tell, but I got just a little bit misty-eyed. It was moving. It was powerful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been awesome to be able to come on, and I look forward to watching your show grow and seeing your success. I think that the premise of your show is extremely important, and I think that there's an appetite for it. I think that there's a lot of people who are looking for meaning and purpose, and the more perspectives that you can bring on, I think that it'll give a better picture, a bigger picture of where people find meaning and what works and what doesn't. So I look forward to seeing where your show goes from here.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been Thomas Westbrook from the YouTube channel Holy Koolaid, which the link for his channel will be in the description of this episode. Thank you all for joining us, and cue the outro. I'm usually supposed to say what number episode it is, but I don't know what number episode it is because I keep changing the order that I air them.
No worries.
Thank you so much for joining us. This has been the Struggle for Meaning podcast, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you for joining me. This has been The Struggle for Meaning with Russell Eugene Welch III as your host. That's me. If you have enjoyed this program, please share it with someone else and leave a 5-star review to help us grow. If you go to lingeringshadow.com, you can find my blog, social media, updates on all my current projects, and announcements for future ones. I post all kinds of stuff on there every day. We always have an ongoing conversation about personal growth and finding meaning there. So hop on over and let's hear your thoughts too. Again, that's lingeringshadow.com. Keep learning, keep growing, and take it all one day at a time. You got this. Remember, you are not alone. We all live life together. So let's share life together.